Paul Kedrosky, Senior Fellow at the Kaufman Foundation. Can technology save the American economy? What's funny about that, Paul?
Well, it's this kind of, it's a wonderfully American question, you know, despite both of us sitting here. I'm a Canadian immigrant. Because it goes to the very heart of this U.S. idea, this idea that, you know, the future is going to be better. It's going to be better because of American invention and innovation and innovativeness. And that's a wonderful ethos and a great ideas to hold dear. But there's no reason to expect that, you know, there's some magic thing that we can do in technology that's somehow going to solve all of the sorts of, you know, financial issues we have as a country and as a state in California and even at the level of individual cities. These are structural problems that should be dealt with head on, not by promising that in future, wait, there's something magic we can do that'll drive economic growth so high and so fast that our debt to GDP ratio won't matter anymore, because our GDP will be so big that the debt won't matter, which is something that the utopians out there, some techno utopians in particular, argue that we don't need to care about debt, because if you grow the economy fast enough on the back of a transition to cloud computing and alternative energy and all these things, we'll grow so much faster than debt grows that this problem goes away. And I think that's naive thinking that's tied to this kind of vestigial view of the role of innovation in terms of being this transformative, wondrous thing that you should never expect that you can understand exactly. It's like no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, Monty Python. That no one knows what's going to happen, so just assume that magic will happen as long as smart people are working at difficult problems and have enough capital. And that's a lovely idea. I just think it's flawed, childish, and wrong.
But doesn't technology create wealth? What did the 90s do? What has Google done? What does Facebook do?
Oh, all of these things do. And it's not, but my point is different, is that relying on technology as some sort of silver bullet for difficult problems, which I think was your original question, is just naive. It's crazy in the context of the difficult things that we face that are so beyond the scale of anything as a country, that this country in particular has ever seen, that we have to be adults about this and deal with all of the problems that we have, ranging from the fiscal and financial problems to how do we grow the economy. There's no question we can do a better job of growing the economy, and technology plays a central role in that, you know, IT in particular, but also clean tech and bio and all the other sorts of, you know, more growth-oriented parts. But the one doesn't solve the other, and expecting that a miracle here will emerge and solve all of our problems over there is just infantile.
As a senior fellow, you figure out where to put money into VCs. Where are you looking now? What do you fancy as sectors of the economy?
We're trying to shrink. So, you know, and this has gotten us in a lot of trouble. So we're trying to shrink our allocation to venture for some of the reasons that are kind of obvious, which is the sector has underperformed woefully over the last decade. But at the same time, it's going through this wrenching transformation. It's going from being a bunch of dudes sucking fees from a $300 million fund and investing merrily out of that now and then, as long as it doesn't screw up the fee gravy train, to much smaller funds, you know, these sort of 10, 15, $5 million funds, which kind of look like toy funds to the incumbents, but are the ones that are actually delivering the returns, and that, more importantly, the ones that entrepreneurs look to.
You mean the Ron Conways?
The Ron Conways, you know, the Jeff Claviers. There's all of these micro seed funds that have emerged. And the interesting thing is, if you stand up in front of an audience of entrepreneurs these days, and here in the Valley, so many of them will point to those funds. Who do you want to have invest? Is it, you know, name your favorite graybeard at a well-known venture fund, or is it, you know, a Clavier, or is it a Conway? They'll all go in that direction. And so what's happening is, and this is kind of ironic, is this industry that funds disruption is being disrupted by a bunch of funds that to the incumbents look like toys, because they're so small. It's like, how can you make any money on a $10 million fund? You should be running $250 at a 2% management fee. That's the way to pay for the Ferrari. Don't be running $10 million in a small fund. And so what we're really interested in as Kaufman is, you know, how do you learn from that? How do you invest in that? Because, you know, if you got a couple of, you know, $100 million to put to work in venture, it's really hard to put it to work in a bunch of $10 million funds. So you ask yourself, so we find ourselves asking ourselves, are we even investors in venture anymore? If the industry is transforming and going to all of these small funds, maybe it's only going to be funded by high net worth people, family foundations, and others. And maybe as institutional investors, the smartest thing we could do to make the venture industry healthy is get the hell out and let it shrink to hell.
Does venture have a future then, big venture?
I don't think big venture has a future in IT. It has a future in clean tech, but it has in some of the areas that have higher capital requirements, like clean tech and bio. I mean, they're not going to all of a sudden start. You're not going to get human data for $50,000 in biotech, and that's not changing anytime soon. But so those areas are still going to need capital. They just don't need as much or as many funds because, again, their returns have been disastrous as well. But in IT in particular, I would love to see even more funds, just smaller funds. And you know, the interesting thing that everybody misses is that in the absence of IT, there is no venture industry. So when we talk about venture, and that's in part because, you know, like 60% of the money that goes out goes into IT, but more importantly, it's only 60% of the money that goes out goes into IT, but to a first approximation, it's 100% of the returns. So if you wiped out IT, there is no asset class called venture capital. So when we talk about all this other stuff, it's mostly just sort of noodling around that wouldn't it be nice if clean tech carried its weight? Wouldn't it be nice if biotech did? IT is the show. So this is the transformation to watch.
I think some of our audience at least will be thrilled that you're writing the obituary of venture.
I hear that all the time.